I have got students that have found me through a teacher listing site who months into it have gone, wait, do you make music of your own? And I'm like, yeah, did you not Google me when we started? You literally found me on a, really? And then they're, thankfully their mind is blown when they go and find it.
Hi, and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, and I help people over 50 who want to learn to play bass, but haven't gotten very far with it yet, or at least not far enough. Welcome to this week's interview. It is with Steve Lawson. Absolutely fascinating, incredible interview talking about all the stuff he does, and we're going to get to that in just a second. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community, men and women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s. And you know what they're doing? They're learning bass. They're having the time of their life playing music that they love. You need to come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove. So let's play bass. Steve Lawson, if you don't know Steve, he's been called the UK's most celebrated and prolific solo bassist whose music is typically described as new age, post-rock, ambient jazz solo bass. He releases about 10 or 12 solo albums, collaborative records, or EPs every year, which have garnered all kinds of critical acclaim all over the world. He's been on the cover of Bass Guitar magazine. He's been described as Britain's most innovative bassist, no contest. And you're going to hear about the fascinating stuff that he does. I won't make you wait any longer. Here's my interview with Steve Lawson. Enjoy. Steve Lawson, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. It's very, very good to see you. It's a joy. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if it was when we first met. What is at the Warwick base camp in Magna-Kirchen, Germany.
I think that's the first time we had a proper conversation. I think we'd met at NAMM before that briefly.
Oh, that's possible.
Because I knew you because of your books. So that was my introduction to you was through your traditional books rather than through the video. But then we had a chat at Germany, and I remember I'd lost my voice.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I sounded, like I was
Well, I hope you got it back.
Struggling. I have. I'm kind of voice.
2014 was a long time ago.
Absolutely. God, blimey. What's
Yeah.
11 years ago, wasn't it? Wow.
That was in Magna-Kirchen, Germany,
Mm.
which I'm kind of getting used to saying. I've never
Magna-Kirchen.
said it the same way once. And you mentioned in the interview that you had a 4.5-year-old son. So he must be
good
what,
Lord.
15 now?
Yeah, so he's nearly 16. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? Yeah.
And then we have bumped into each other. You mentioned NAMM. I tend to bump into you like just about every
Yeah. Well,
NAMM.
I saw you this January briefly. We got to say hi, which was nice because that was I guess was where this we kindled the idea for this. But it's been a while since we last got to sit down and have a proper catch up. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yes, and I hope that fan is doing you some good. You mentioned before I hit record that it's a bit warm and
Yeah, we're in the middle of a heat wave, which is for a British heat wave is kind of like sort of mild autumnal day for people in the Midwest, I guess. But here, we're not used to this at all, and as you can see, we don't have proper air conditioning. So I have a fan, a fairly good fan, it must be said. I have a fan, and I have sorbet here, which is cooling me down from the inside, and water. So I will be attempting to do that. But if I start looking like I'm about to cry, it's probably because I've got sweat in my eyes. Unless you just manage to kind of hit an emotional button, but we'll see.
you never know where these interviews are going to go.
Mm.
Well, let me start out by saying you look good. You look robust. I know you had quite a health scare.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us what happened and where are you now and where are you going in the future health-wise?
Yeah, so in 2022, mid 2022, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. It's funny. I mean, I'd been losing weight for months, but I'm a cyclist. I'm just coming from a bike ride just now. I'm a fairly avid cyclist, and I just thought that riding my bike was doing a very effective job of shedding unnecessary pounds. and actually what was happening was that I had lymphoma. And so eventually I kind of, like most middle-aged blokes, it took me a very long time to get round to actually talking to a doctor rather than doing it myself with the hospital of Google. And so eventually I went to the doctor and was diagnosed with lymphoma. Spent 3 weeks in hospital.
Excuse me, did you have any symptoms other than the unexpected weight loss?
I had a really bad pain in my stomach and a tumour, so that once I lay down, my doctor could see it. So yeah, but the two main ones with lymphoma are weight loss and night sweats. And I don't remember whether I had that or not. Again, it's not a thing that I would necessarily have clocked because, we don't have air conditioning, so I would have just put it down to the weather. But yeah, I had a lot of stomach pain. So I'd in fact 4 days before I went into hospital, I cycled from Leeds to Birmingham, which is 120 miles, 115 miles, something like that.
Wow.
And all the way I'd been going, oh blimey, my stomach really hurts. And not surprising, I had a tumour that size in it. So I was on chemotherapy for about 5 or 6 months, and lost some ungodly amount of weight, 40 pounds or something overall. Was lost all my hair, and was the diagnosis ended up getting significantly more complex than just kind of a sort of more vanilla version of lymphoma. But thankfully the chemotherapy worked, and I was told I was what do they call it? I had complete metabolic response as of January 2023, and have been having regular checkups ever since, and no recurrence and no scares, no symptoms, no nothing. So yeah, thankfully I'm really well and I'm healthy, and yeah, so life is good. But it was I mean, the timing was horrific because the reason I was in Leeds the week before that was that the plan was for me to finish my PhD in 2022, which I'd started just after we last spoke in Germany. I started a PhD, so 2015 I started working on that, and had a long delay during COVID because obviously I couldn't get to the university and I couldn't, there was no supervision, so had a long leave of absence during that. Had just got back into it after that in 2022 and was meant to finish it, and ended up with cancer, and so took another extended break, and but then eventually finished it this June.
Congratulations.
I submitted it last October, had a viva in January, or defence as you call it in the States, had corrections to do. I passed.
What do you call it there?
And the corrections are all done, so I'm now Dr. Steve.
Congratulations. What do you call it there? What we call it?
A viva, with viva voce, which is kind of, which means spoken something.
Okay.
But yeah, it's the point at which you give a spoken defense of it, and a panel of experts quiz you about it, and then say, yeah, that's great, or maybe you should have talked about this. So you've passed, but you need to add this, this, and this. So they gave me a list of things, a couple of which were quite complex, and I was initially like most creative people, I don't like being told what to do. So I was initially a little bit kind of what's the word? And I was just annoyed by the fact that they'd asked me to make all these changes. And so but yeah.
I just before I want to ask you all about this, but your lymphoma was discovered in 2022, and you're basically okay by January of 2023.
Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, I'm glad you pulled me back to that. Yeah. Well, so lymphoma is hematology rather than oncology. If we're kind of thinking about the sort of two sides of cancer. There's blood cancer, which is lymphoma and leukemia, and oncology is the other side, and hematology is actually really quite advanced in terms of treatment these days. It's really extraordinary that things that even 10 years ago would have ended my life were now treatable. And I had what day is it? Wednesday. Yesterday I had my 6-month checkup, and my consultant was saying to me, she said, even now there are things that they can do with gene therapy and specific kind of targeted therapies that they couldn't have even done 3 years ago when I had it. Wow. So it's extraordinary how fast that recovery is coming. Yeah, but I had 6 months of chemotherapy, and there was one point in it where my consultant said, I don't even know if this is going to work because of the complication that I had with this triple hit lymphoma thing, which means like there were 3 possible mutations, and I had all 3. I remember speaking to a friend who's an oncologist in Texas, and he just went, oh shit, when I told him, because he knew that was not good news. And yeah, that was, and so it was that sort of level where cancer doctors were going, this doesn't sound good, but the response is super variable in terms of how your body actually responds to it, and all the way through. This is the interesting bit. Every nurse, doctor, consultant, whatever, said to me, the reason you're doing as well with your treatment is because you ride a bike.
Wow.
Because as a form of fitness, cycling it's endurance based. It's not about building muscle and then just kind of looking ripped.
So it's
You
the
train
cardio?
you train your body to go all day and to be exhausted at the end of the day and wake up the next day and do it again. That kind of endurance bike riding is the perfect exercise for
Is it
dealing with the
because
kind
it's
of
bike
battering of
riding, or
chemotherapy.
is it because it's actually bike riding, or is it because it's cardio?
Well, it's because it's endurance. So it's because what I trained for was multi-day endurance rides. So putting my body through a huge amount of stress for. I mean, I fairly regularly cycle from Birmingham to London and back, which is 130 miles each way, something like that, 220 kilometers. And so that's a 9.5, 10 hours in the saddle, and 11 and a half hours lapse time. So it's an entire day of energy output, and you do that, and then you rest, and then you come back, and it's like that, and that's kind of what chemo is. You batter your body with these chemicals that hopefully will kill the cancer before they kill you, and then you spend a couple of days recovering, and then you do it all again. So that's what they were addressing. They were saying that it's that kind of fitness, because if you've just been pumping, kind of doing weights and building up muscle, that doesn't protect you at all from that. You haven't developed any endurance. You haven't developed the ability to withstand a battering. But yeah, so I'm sure
What got
you probably get the same as a roadie. I'm sure roadies would have the same kind of strength from carrying bass amps in and out of venues and up and down stairs.
what got you into biking?
When I grew up on a bike as a kid, I just like most kids, I kind of that was my form of transport before I got a car. And then I took 20 years out and was a motorist. And then a friend gave me a bike about 10 years ago. He just said, I've got a spare bike. Do you want one? And I was like, yeah, great. And I'll ride it to work. And so I kind of gradually was doing that. And then when COVID hit, I wasn't a long distance cyclist by that point at all. My longest ride was about 15 miles at that point. But when COVID hit, and there was me and my then wife and my kid were in the house together, and it's a fairly small house. So I was like, one of us needs to go out. And the one safe thing that you could do, the one thing you were allowed to do legally here, was to go for a bike ride. So I started going further and further and further, and so through lockdown and beyond, I just started getting. And where I live, I'm on the edge of Birmingham, which is the second biggest city in Britain, and I'm on the edge on the southern side of it, and we have miles and miles and miles of rolling hills within 5 or 10 minutes of here. So I just started getting out in the country, and I just got further and further. I did my first century ride, did a 100-mile ride, and just started adding to that, and it just became, yeah, I don't know, it became quite addictive. I guess it just was it was the kind of fitness that, as a middle-aged bloke, that I could do without risking kind of needing a hip transplant or whatever, because when you hit our age, everything gets a little bit more risky in that way. And so it was because cycling is zero impact. It was the kind of exercise that I could do, and yeah, and not risk doing myself too much of an injury, as long as I don't get hit by a car.
There's a woman that lives near me, Catherine. She is on her bike all day, every day. If I go out in the morning, I see her. If I go out in the evening, I see her. If I go in this direction, I see her. I saw her this morning. I saw her when I look out the window. I see her in the snow. If it's
Great.
not too snow, she's. I think you're probably working a lot harder than she is. She's just a nice, easy pace, always smiling, but it's an
I mean, that,
obsession.
and
She's
that's what I love. I mean, it's what I love about. I suppose what I love about cycling is what I love about music, is that you can do it at any level of intensity, and it can be therapeutic and magical thing in your life. That I find this as a bass teacher, that a lot of people come to lessons with the assumption that it's going to be a boot camp, and I'm like, no, no, no. The most important thing is what this does for you. Not that there's some sort of external pressure to be at a certain level. It's like, what is it that you want music to be in your life? And it's the same with cycling. That I have friends who race. I have friends who are world class kind of endurance riders. And I recently went for a ride with a woman who had won the transcontinental race across Europe. So extraordinary athletes. I have these friends, but I also have friends who who use a bike to get to the shop and back, and it's like that's being a cyclist as well. There is no thing in the same way that people who play bass for just for themselves in their bedroom to play their favorite music from when they were kids. It's just as important as doing it as a job, and that's the beauty of it. That there's no hierarchy. There's no point at which you stop being a bass player because what you're doing is not important enough. It's like, and it's the same with a bike,
I'm definitely going to come back to that in this conversation, but I want to ask you about your PhD. I have a student actually from England who is a bona fide rocket scientist. She really is a rocket scientist, and when she told me about her PhD in England, she says over here we call it a DPhil.
Yeah, a doctor of philosophy. Yeah. So again, it all depends on kind of what area you're in.
Well, she grew up, I think, in Liverpool.
Cool.
And,
Yeah. I'm an area as in sort of academic area rather than physical area. Like yeah. So
okay.
So DPhil is obviously doctor of philosophy. So which is so it's PhD, doctorate. There's all these kind of different names for it.
Yes.
But
I'm good at getting off on tangents that don't matter at all.
See, this is the problem. You and I could talk for days.
Okay, here's the question. What is your PhD about? What prompted you to do it? And what was that like?
So my PhD is it's about my subscriber audience, my Bandcamp subscriber audience, and their influence on my work. So it's practice led. So there are two types of practice research models for PhD. There's practice based and there's practice led. A practice based PhD is one where the work itself is the evidence of your contribution to knowledge. So you produce a portfolio of work, and that work is extraordinary and groundbreaking. And I had the opportunity to do one like that. A practice led one is one where there is some kind of theoretical contribution to knowledge that is in the way you conceive of what you do, and the work is evidence of that, but the work isn't where the contribution lies. And so mine is practice led. So the contribution to knowledge is about a new way of thinking about the gathering together of a community in a space, both physical and virtual, where I get to learn from them about what I do, where together we create meaning around the work, and that process is iterative, so it's constantly happening, and I'm constantly able to re-understand what I do. It's re-encoded is the language in the PhD with meaning both by me telling them about it and by them telling me about it.
Well, what is the name of that practice or that science or that thing, that entity?
So it's I guess it's music. It's music because obviously the submission includes 3 albums, but it's also audience studies and musicology, and there's a sort of social science component to it. I mean, there's probably even an internet studies component to it because it's talking about the development of that from, there's a history section that charts the history of my community online that starts with the Bottom Line mailing list. Were you on the Bottom Line back in the day? Do you remember the Bottom Line? It was like an email digest.
I do remember that, and that's also the name of my membership, the Bottom Line Club.
There we go. Yeah, so the Bottom Line was back.
But
back
I know
in
what
the 90s.
I know what
it was
you're
an
talking
email
about.
list, and so
Yes.
I went
Yes,
from
that
that to talk bass, to hosting my own forum, to blowing that up and spreading it out onto social media because I wanted to make it all public. So we moved on to Twitter and Facebook, and then eventually bringing it all back into one place on Bandcamp. And so now I have this subscriber. So I've kind of managed to get the economic rationale and the community in together. So I have a subscriber community that get everything that I release. I've now put out 149 albums, I think it is, something like that.
Break this down for me, though, in simple to understand layman's terms. This is about music and how people respond to it, how they react to it, and there's a community aspect.
Or how their response to it shapes the way that I work. So the 3 albums represent. Actually, it's 4 albums. It's 4 albums, but from the 2 of them are from the same concert. So it's about how I understand. How I've created a space in which the dialogue between me and my audience creates meaning, which I'm able to incorporate into how I play. And that because I'm an improviser, the people that are in the space that I'm in when I'm playing completely change my choices. So one of the albums in the submission is for me headlining a festival in Belfast. I headlined the Belfast Guitar Festival. They did a bass night and I was doing that. And at that, none of the people there really knew what I did. They knew me by reputation. I'd been on the cover of magazines, and so they knew who this guy, but none of them knew about what I did. So that shaped my creative choices. That I don't have a set list that I play. Everything is improvised. So I'm making music based on what I assume the audience is going to get. I'm not a belligerent improviser. I don't try and antagonize people with my music. So I was trying to shape something that made sense to them. And so there's a bunch of choices in there. And there's a section in the PhD that documents that process. There's what's called autoethnography. So I write about my experience of that process. But then there's another one. One of the live recordings is from the 20th anniversary show. It's the 20th anniversary of my first ever solo gig. And I did that here in Birmingham to an audience that was largely made up of subscribers and friends and some of the people who had been at my first ever show. So I was playing to an audience who knew what I did and understood what I did. And I had a pre-show and post-show discussion with the audience, which I recorded and transcribed for the PhD. And so within that discussion, again, as an improviser, not having decided what I was going to play, what I got from the audience was permission to do whatever I wanted to do. They were just like, yeah, we're just here. So there was no sense of expectation. There was no sense that they were like, we hope you play tunes from that album, because that's never going to happen. I don't play things twice. So there was no sense of that. There was just this invitation from the audience to go wherever the music went. And so as a result, it's a much more freewheeling, experimental, far-reaching record. So the music itself is shaped and changed by the audience context. And then from those recordings, I got this feedback from my subscriber audience about what they think of it, and that gets incorporated into the making of new work.
So talk to me about, is there a balance between what you feel and what you hear and what you want to express on the one end and what the audience wants and what they are asking for and how they respond? Is there, is there a spectrum, or is there a sweet spot where those things combine?
That's a fantastic question. That's a really good question. So I think for me, one of the beautiful things about the subscriber audience is that they never tell me what I should do. And this isn't a thing that I've ever said, don't tell me what to do. But because it's a fairly flat hierarchy, like I'm not the celebrity within that space. Like it's a small enough community. I don't situate myself in a way that makes me feel lofty or kind of, somehow celebrated. I'm just the provider of the soundtrack. So what they tend to do is to talk about their own experience with the music rather than say to me, you know what you should do. So rather than me dealing with their expectations in the sense of having been told what to do and then having to balance that against my own decisions, I have total agency over what I choose to do. But what I get from them is I get the insight that they bring by saying, oh, I was listening to music and it reminded me of this, or I played it in this context and I found it really moving, or oh, wait, that new thing you just did, that sounds like a thing you did 13 years ago. Were those connected? And I'm like, I'd forgotten I'd done that. You remember that, I didn't. So they're able to draw connections between things. And sometimes having them describe what they think is going on is really useful, because I've realized that my process, which is fairly complicated in terms of, that my pedal board, which is completely ridiculous, that it's a virtual pedal board. It's inside the Mod Duo X, which is a box over here. Maybe we'll get into that. That I get to understand how much of that they're aware of. And so that invites me to either foreground the kind of technical side of it, or to just see that as being a background thing. Because also I think this is one of the interesting things, and you'll probably have an interesting take on this as well, because so much of what you do now is video, that actually when you play to people who can see what you're doing, their understanding of what you're doing and their understanding of what's important in the music changes. And you and I grew up in an age when we bought records. So we didn't know what bass playing looked like most of the time. We would see people on TV, but often they were miming. But unless we could get out to live gigs, and I grew up in a town where there wasn't much going on, I didn't have much idea about what bass playing looked like. So I would kind of see bits of Level 42 on TV, or The Who, or whatever it was that I would see. I remember seeing a Stanley Clarke gig in 1990 from the Seville Guitar Festival, and it changing the way I thought about how to hit the instrument, because I'd never seen anyone do that. Yeah. Whereas now, all of music listening is visually mediated to some degree. If you hear something and you wonder how it's done, you can almost certainly find a video of that person doing it, because that's how we promote what we do. That's how we make it kind of transactional. And so that's interesting for me, because as somebody who records everything live and unedited, I never overdub, I never edit, I never chop bits out. That means there's songs I remember to hit record, which is not always the case, but as long as I remember to hit record, there's always a full video document of exactly what I've done. So when people listen to it and go, I can't work out for the life of me how this is live, I can go, great, go and have a look. You can see me playing it. So then they go, oh, so I'll have something like that. This is one of my MIDI controllers, the Cuneo from Keith McMillan, and so they'll see me playing drums or piano or whatever on there. They can actually watch the video of me doing that. And suddenly that brings it to life. That kind of makes it a lot more real, because otherwise it's like they can't conceive of where these acoustic drum sounds are coming from, or why there's the sound of bird song in the background, or whatever other mad thing I've come up with. And recently I've added in a synth engine, so I can actually kind of, from the bass, I can actually kind of play it's pitched to MIDI, so I can actually trigger keyboard sounds from the bass rather than, because I used to play piano on here, but I now do all of that kind of pad stuff from the bass. So yeah, there's the visual side of things. Again with the subscriber community, because on social media, again, you'll see your own analytics, and you see that the engagement, the time of engagement on a platform like Instagram is minute. So I might put up a 7-minute video, and the average watch time is 8 seconds. And you go, well, that's because most people haven't watched any of it at all. They just scrolled past it. So you're actually getting far, far lower engagement. You look at the numbers and go, oh, wow, 7,000 people saw this video. No. Maybe 50 people watched it all the way through. Whereas with my subscriber community, because it's happening in the space that, A, they've paid for, so they have a different sense of value within it, but also it's a space where they get to talk to me directly about it, rather than performatively like on YouTube, where, you know, the comments are often about what someone wants to say about themselves rather than how they want to engage with you about the work. So in that subscriber space, we get to actually have a conversation about it, and I'll get asked questions, and they'll go, oh, wait, what were you doing there? And sometimes they'll say, I don't get, like, those drums sound like you can't play. Why is that drum part so broken? And we then get to have a conversation about why I like wonky drums, where the hip hop influence is on that, or what, you know, whatever it is. So we get into some quite deep musicology in those conversations, which overwhelmingly, the quality and depth of that conversation that happens with the subscriber community is of, you know, orders of magnitude greater than I get anywhere else.
Talk to me a little more, go a little deeper about why people give you money to subscribe to something. What are they looking for? What do they want to get? And how are they better off for the experience?
I think it's a lovely question. This is great. Yeah, I think you'd probably get as many answers as there are subscribers. I think the trend would be towards a desire to help me carry on doing what I'm doing. I think I started talking about 15 years ago about the concept of the gratitude economy. That if you've got people who are great, I'm sweating in my eyes. I've got sweat in my eyes.
Oh, it's altruistic?
So I think there's I think it's that people will pay for what they're grateful for. So one of the problems with the streaming economy is that nobody is grateful to Spotify for anything. But Spotify sits as this mediator between us and our audience, so nobody can express anything to us. It's impossible to communicate with an artist through Spotify. And actually shopping is a means of communication. So when you pay for something, when I bought a record this morning on Bandcamp because this artist appeared in my Instagram feed who had chosen to boycott a gig because someone was in the audience that they felt it would have been unethical to play a concert specifically for that audience. They chose to boycott the gig. It became a news story, and I saw it, and I was really impressed by this ethical choice that they were willing to turn down a gig for the sake of something so significant. So I went and found their Bandcamp page, and I bought their record. I could have just listened to it. And I liked it. I listened to a bit of it, and I liked it. But the reason I bought it was because I wanted to say thank you to them for what they'd just done. I wanted to support them for doing that. If I'd listened to them on Spotify, there would have been no sense at all that I was helping them by doing that. The 2.5 cents that they would have got from me listening to their album 3 times or whatever it was, that, you know, however the economics work out, would have made no difference at all. There's no communication component to me engaging with their work. So for my audience, every time that subscription comes out at the end of the year, it's amazing actually how many of them will either contact me and say, can I increase the amount that I pay? And the short answer is no. Bandcamp's a bit weird like that. You'd have to cancel it and then resubscribe. But what they sometimes do is they'll send me money via PayPal because what they want to do is they want to say thank you. Because I've put out some large volume of work in between. There's an exclusivity to it because most of that, none of that work is available on streaming platforms. And a tiny handful of it is available on YouTube, you know, in terms of I put up the occasional video. And a couple of the albums a year might be public albums on Bandcamp where you can just go and stream them and then buy them as individual albums if you want. But the vast majority of my work is subscriber only. So I'm making music specifically for that community. with the understanding that that community will then kick it around and talk about it, and we can discuss it, and there's a sense of it taking on this whole other layer of meaning. You know, as it rolls down the hill, it picks up all this kind of grass and debris of kind of people's uses with the music, and so it becomes a much bigger ball than it was at the top. You know, that is tangible and made explicit to the audience, that's what's going on. That this is music that is made for them, with them in mind. Because the mad thing is that without them, I wouldn't do it.
Well, yeah. I have a two-part question. When they're in the membership, do they have a chance to log on and see you and talk to you and have a Q&A with you and you know, have you talk to them and play for them?
I mean, I should do more of it. I mean, during COVID, we did a lot of that. During COVID, I did. So while everybody else was doing gigs, online gigs, I'd spent 10 years doing online gigs by then. That wasn't a new thing to me. What I did was I just hosted conversations. I just sent a Zoom link to the subscribers and said, look, we can just hang out here. Yeah. So we would just chat. So it wasn't Q&A with me. It was communal conversation. So
well, that was the second half of my question. Do they have an opportunity to communicate with each other even when it's not there?
So again, yeah. So I mean, the short answer is not that I facilitated, but yes, because that community extent has started long before the Bandcamp thing. There are people on there who talk to each other every single day who met because they were fans of mine. They met either on my forum when I had a forum on my own website, when I had just, you know, kind of a PHP BB, you know, sort of web forum that was the stevelawson.net forum. That was back in 2002. I think I installed that and had that until about 2008. And so that community, there was a lot of friendships that formed within that. And I mean, I've got a ton of friends that I met through that who are, you know, are now good friends, or people who've hosted house concerts or whatever. But there were a lot of people, you know, there's a community of people. And if I log on to Blue Sky or Facebook, I will see them talking to each other, and I'll know that those people met because they were fans of what I did, which is lovely.
I'm going to be adding a community element.
But I don't. But to kind of to more directly answer your question, I don't do anywhere near as much of that as I should. I mean, I should be doing. You know, if I was smart, I'd be doing a weekly or monthly Q&A with them, and I would, because that would add value to it, and they would be a perceived kind of additional value to that. Part of it is because my focus was always on making music. It wasn't on. There were lots and lots of things I could do that would probably grow that community and make me a lot more money. But what I wanted was a space where, rather than it becoming this kind of generalized, I mean, for want of a better word, content machine, where I was making video and making all these kind of different things, I was like, no, I want to make art. I want to make the art that matters to me, and I want to find the best way of doing that for a bunch of people who care about it. So, I mean, obviously, the peak in terms of the size of the community was when I got cancer. Because one of the things that I said was, at the time I said, look, there's no GoFundMe. I live in a country with universal healthcare, so I don't have hospital bills. However, I can't work. The one bit of my business that is still functioning is that I have music that you can buy, and I have a subscription service. So you can either buy records or you can subscribe, and that's completely up to you. And the contribution was enormous. I mean, it was mind-blowing. It wasn't GoFundMe huge. It wasn't like, you know, I would have made a lot more money if I'd done a GoFundMe. I just didn't need it. That felt disingenuous to sort of try and leverage an illness for extra cash. But you know,
people subscribe to your membership because they feel that you get them, and you speak to them, and they get something out of they have access to you and your music, and they're grateful for it. And
yeah, absolutely.
We're paying money to be part of this community and to join membership. Is that kind of the bottom?
And they get, you know, they just get an enormous amount of music, and I think for a lot of them are music makers. So there's a lot of practitioners in the community, and so for a lot of them, I think that one of the things they're following along is, I mean, this came out in the pre-show discussion that I transcribed for the PhD, that there were people saying, you know, I'm here because you're doing what I've always wanted to do. As a bass player, I love the idea of the bass as a melodic and harmonic and textural instrument, and nobody does it as well as you do. So I'm here because that to me is incredibly exciting, and so, you know, there's nobody better. That I get to come and see you do it live is an extraordinary thing, and I subscribe so I can hear the development and the ideas that are coming out in that. So for some of them, they are bass players who do that. There are other people for whom it's a ready supply of bespoke music that they experience as being for them, because it is. I mean, it's just for that subscriber community. And so sometimes, I mean, a couple of times they will specifically change it. So I remember I put up a video a few years back called Colony Collapse Disorder, and it's quite funky. And I put up this video, and one of the comments was somebody said, I said, this is great. I can hear, it feels to me like it could, this is the first half of something. And I went, wow, that's a really interesting thought. So I went away and I hit record again, and I recorded another, like, very different kind of second movement to it. And I took the two files and I overlapped them very slightly so that as one fades out, the other one fades in, and it became a piece twice as long off the back of that comment. So that was just, he didn't say, you have to do this. Nobody said, this music isn't good enough, make it better. He just said, oh, I could hear this happening. And it was thrown in, and so I did it. So there's a sense for those subscribers, that a tangible feeling that actually that their contribution to the understanding of the work changes the work. So they're part of that process.
What's the name of your membership?
Oh, it's just, I doesn't even have a name. It's just on Bandcamp. It's just my subscriber community on Bandcamp. See, this is the thing. I'm terrible at marketing.
They just search your name. Is that all they need to do?
Yeah. So stevelawson.bandcamp.com is where you would find it.
Okay.
Yeah. So or music.stevelawson.net. They both point to the same place, which again is like, no, that's really terrible branding to have two different URLs that go to the same place. But that's the thing. Like, I've kind of, that I never thought of this as a way of, like, I never think, oh God, I could get rich doing this. I could, it was always like, how do I get to make the music that is constantly bubbling up inside me? How do I get, because I produce an awful lot of music. I can sit down most days and play, and I record. I play at a super high level. I trained myself over the last 30 years to play so that I don't need to edit. It's very, I'm trying to think the last time I did a gig where I didn't release it. Like, I very rarely ever do a gig that doesn't come out as an album, because I don't have to. It's not like I've said every gig I ever do will be released. I've said every gig that I do that's worth releasing will be released. And if I did one that I felt fell flat, then I wouldn't put it out. Or if I felt like it just covered ground that I'd already covered, I wouldn't put it out. One of my subscribers who's been listening to my stuff since he bought my first album 25 years ago, and he said, I do not know a single artist who is as prolific as you and as varied as you. I can't get my head around the idea that you can do this, and every album has a distinct sound and identity to it, which is an enormous compliment from somebody who has got 149 albums by me and has listened to them all repeatedly, and then comes back and says, nobody else does this. So that,
do you
that
listen to them back after a live performance, and it felt really good while you were playing, and then you listen back and it wasn't, or the opposite, it felt okay, but
the opposite is more
back
common.
and it was awesome.
The opposite is more common. So there would be times I'll get to the end of the gig and go, yeah, I wasn't sure about that. And I'll listen back to it, and suddenly, and when I've forgotten what I thought was happening, because the problem, the feeling of not liking it normally comes from me having an idea of what I wanted to do, and the music taking it somewhere else. So there's a kind of a struggle between me and the music, where I had an intention and it went off. And I think, and composers obviously talk about this all the time. Songs taking on a life of their own. But it happens to me in an improv, and I'll be playing, and it'll just the emotional weight of it will point it somewhere, and I'll go, okay, I need to go there. Or the audience, there'll be an audience thing. I did it. One of my favorite gigs for that audience thing was, I was doing a gig in Northern California on Super Bowl Sunday in 2013, maybe 2014, 2013. It was a gig with a multi-instrumentalist from San Francisco called Daniel Berkman, and he and I have done a bunch of gigs together. And we got to the show. It was a house concert. It was in somebody's living room. We got to the show, and most of the audience were over 60. And so we looked at this crowd and we thought, oh God, we better not do the weird stuff. We thought we'll make it kind of folky and gentle today, because it looks like a fairly civilized audience. We won't go too strange. And as we sat down and we were setting up the instruments, because obviously we're all in one space, there's no backstage, everybody's just hanging out and eating hummus and dip and God knows what. And we heard this conversation in the audience about their favorite experimental composers, and people were talking eloquently about Morton Feldman and Colin Nancaro and we were like, wait, we've got some lunatics in the audience. We've got people who like really weird music here. So Daniel and I looked at each other and went, We can do anything. And so we'd come into it with this understanding that what we needed to do was to play down to the audience. And by listening to them, even listening to them surreptitiously, even though they weren't talking to us, they were talking to each other, we suddenly realized that we'd actually second guessed them completely wrong. And that actually they were far more open to whatever strange nonsense we could come up with than we imagined. And as a result, I mean, it's a beautiful concert. The recording is one of my favorites. It's an album called Serendipity for that reason. Yeah, and it goes to places that we weren't expecting, because right at the moment that we started to play, we realized, oh, hold on a minute, we don't need to constrain it. We don't need to tame it. This is an audience that are more than open to experimental music.
You remind me. I've been thinking of Michael Manring. I think he's got his thing and you've got your thing, but is there some overlap, would you say, or how would you?
God.
How are your approaches the same or different?
I mean, there's a huge overlap because my relationship with Michael goes back a long way. We've been online friends since the late '90s. He was my hero before that. He's probably the reason I loop was an article with him in Bass Player magazine where he talked about the Jam Man, and I just started writing for Bassist magazine, and I requested a Jam Man to review. So he's the reason I got a looper in the first place. And then from 2001 onwards, we started touring together. So I've done more shows with Michael than anybody other than maybe my ex-wife. We've played together in England, we've played together in California, we've done NAMM show gigs together. And he, as a musical thinker and particularly as an improviser, he's had a profound influence on me, but I think from what he said, I've had a profound influence on him as well. And I didn't realize until I interviewed him for the PhD. There's a big interview with him in it. The whole thing is transcribed in the appendix, but it's quoted extensively. But at the point when he and I met, was only just transitioning into being an improviser. He'd spent however many years as a composer, as somebody who all of his music was very densely written. And so his time with Henry Kaiser in Yo Miles and a bunch of other projects had kind of introduced him to improv. But when he and I started playing together, it was one of the first situations in which he was getting up on stage and everything was improvised. Michael and I have never played together, not on stage, and we've only ever once played a tune. We did a weird comedy version of Autumn Leaves once. And everything else we've ever done.
There a recording of that somewhere?
No, thank God, because it was ridiculous. But everything else we've done was just you start or I'll start, and we just play. And so as a result, and I mean, you can imagine what it's like when you're on stage with your hero, the person who has changed, I mean, I can't think of anybody, maybe Bill Frisell would be on that level for me as well. But like Michael was he was the reason I did this. And fortunately, technically what he was doing was so far out from what I do, I don't actually sound like him. I couldn't sound like him. The hip shot thing takes what he does into a very different kind of space. So that actually makes our sounds really complementary. But we would have, I mean, the depth of that influence was also, a lot of it was in the conversation that we would have while we were touring, apart from making each other laugh all the time. But we would have these incredibly in-depth conversations about, because so when I was talking about weird composers in that gig conversation, he's a huge fan of Harry Partch and sort of the American microtonal composer. And so he got me into Harry Partch, and I started reading about and buying records by Harry Partch. So there were sort of very specific things that he kind of introduced me to. But also we would just talk about improvisation and technology and looping and performance, and it was like doing a PhD every time we went on tour. I would just kind of there was never a point where a conversation felt like it was too deep or too arch or too arcane. We would just go down every rabbit hole.
I interviewed him.
Still one of my favorite people.
I interviewed him maybe, I don't know, a year or so ago, and we almost the whole interview was about playing in tune and being in tune. And I'm thinking like, geez, it's either in tune or it's not. Oh, no, it's no. Deeper than that. And talking about overtones and all this.
I remember one of the first people to say that, to explain that to me was Rick Turner. And Rick once interrupted one of my gigs to talk to me about my intonation and how much he loved it, which was really, I've got it on video, and so after Rick passed, I managed to kind of chop out that bit of video and put it up online because it was an amazing moment. Rick Turner, arguably the second most important person in the development of our instrument after Leo Fender. The number of innovations that he started, he was the first person to do, is absolutely mind-boggling. And he sat there at this gig and he stopped and said, I would recognize your sound and your tone anywhere.
Wow.
And he said, but I also recognize your intonation. You have a very specific way that you play things and a way that you hear things, and it's absolutely beautiful. And it was like, that's Rick Turner saying that. That's nuts. That's the guy, that's the guy that started all these amazing things. And for years I played graphite neck basses exclusively. I played moduluses, and he owned the patent. It was him and Jeff Gould together.
Right over there is my modulus.
Yeah, I've got three of them here. Yes.
If everything is totally improvised, it's never been played before, it's never going to be played again. So you do a performance, a concert, whatever, and then you listen back to the recording. How often are you, well, maybe if it's fresh right afterwards, you'd remember, but if you listen to it a little while later, how often are you surprised at what you hear, or you don't know where it's going to go next? Because it's
all the time. And again, that's one of the joys of being prolific. Because I think if I did one album a year,
you can't predict your own playing where you're going to go.
No, not at all. No. And so there were still things. So there were two albums of mine. My two favorite records of mine are two that I did back to back in 2018, 2019. So Beauty and Desolation and The Arctic is Burning. And both of them, I listen to them now and I go, how did I do that? How on earth did I play that? Like, I don't understand them at all.
Yeah.
I was in a particularly interesting kind of harmonic space as well. I was exploring a bunch of harmony things that I'd got from an Alan Holdsworth video. And I obviously don't play like Holdsworth. I don't have that kind of level of technique, and I don't, it's not fusion in that sense. But there was a harmonic thing that he was doing with a mode of limited transposition that I was digging into. And so there's the harmonic things in there that I find just beguiling and baffling, and I listen to them as though somebody else made them. And it's like, this is extraordinary, this stuff. And because I'm an improviser, I don't need to keep my pedal board the same, because I don't need to be able to play those tunes live. So I'm now 17 iterations of my pedal board on from that album, and I have no idea how I made those sounds.
Good thing you recorded it.
So I can watch the video and go, okay, well, I had those are the analog pedals, but I can't see the pedal board, like the electric, the digital part of it at all. I can't see what I did, and I can't see what the signal path was, and I didn't keep a copy of it. So there are things. So, and this is one of the things that I love. I remember, because a thing that really struck me was maybe 30 years ago. I remember reading an interview with Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders, and she said, I hate the sound of my own voice. She said, I don't even listen back in the studio. I never listen to myself sing. And I went, why are you doing this then? Like, why would you? I mean, obviously in her case it's because she gets paid an enormous amount of money for doing it. But like, if I hated what I did, or if I was disappointed by it, why would I do it? And I remember talking to a conductor once, or a composer who was also a conductor, and he said that he'd never conducted a performance that he was happy with. I was like, I've never played a performance that I wasn't surprised by, because I don't have any expectation of exactly what it's going to be like. It's always a surprise. Now, that doesn't mean that things don't go wrong. They don't very often these days, but they have done at various times. But it does mean that the vast majority of the music is a delight and a surprise to me, because I haven't fixated on what it's going to be before it is. And again, part of that is about the complexity of the looping rig, and that I play in a way that means that I can't remember what I've just done. I'll play things, and that might just be that I'm mucking about with rhythm, so that there are things I need to react to, as though the loop is another player. Yeah. And I might put two loops that are of different lengths together, so that there are these different rhythms that emerge from it, and that I have to respond to those and make sense of them. So rather than looping to create a backing track to just play over the top of, in a sort of Ed Sheeran kind of way, which is cool. I understand why that works. What I want is a loop that becomes at least sort of power sentient. It's like, it feels like it's got a mind of its own, and I'm having to react to it and respond to it, because it's that dialogue between me and me of 30 seconds ago that I'm really interested in. I'm interested in that conversation. And then as I layer sounds, and as I reprocess loops through other things, and again, I don't ever beat sync things. I don't ever have all of my delays clocked to the same tempo, because I want that struggle. I want that that depth. I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be square and rigid and everything sewn up, because life isn't like that. My life isn't like that, certainly. And so for me, for the music to actually have that sense of narrative meaning and consistency, which I want it to have, particularly in the context of the subscriber community, it has to have a depth and a complexity and a nuance to it that reflects all of those things as they are manifest in mine and everybody else's life. So the idea of tidying it up to make it palatable for an Instagram audience or a YouTube audience or a radio audience, like the economics of the subscription buys me out of that.
Yeah.
Like, because I don't like, if I was on Spotify, I would need to have what, 200,000 monthly listeners to make it worthwhile. I don't want 200,000 people listening to my music. I would hate that, because with those 200,000, there would be several thousand of them that would start telling me what I should do. Yeah. Without any context at all, because they're listening to it on a streaming platform. They're not people who are invested in all of it, like my subscriber community are, who will tell me what it means to them, but they don't ever tell me what to do with it, because we're a community. It'll be like your family doing that. They would never do that. So I've got this community that fund it, that understand it, that collectively know more about what I'm doing than I do. They remember where it came from, and are willing to tell me what it means to them in the context of their lives, in a way that says to me, just do what you do. And they're willing to say thank you as well, which again is an extraordinary thing to receive as a musician. When somebody just sends you a note and says, man, that was amazing. I really felt like, particularly with the music I made during COVID and when I was ill, or like I do a Christmas release every year. I do a Christmas album, and that often really connects with people. There are people who say yours is the only Christmas music I ever listened to. The only specifically Christmas music I ever listened to is your stuff, because it's not polished, because it's not made for adverts. It's not made for a Will Ferrell film, as much as I love Elf. It's made within that kind of spiky, broken, weird aesthetic that goes on in my solo stuff. I just the vehicle happens to now be a Christmas tune, which I've only half learned, because that's much more fun than memorizing it properly and playing it slick. I'd much rather struggle my way through it and improvise on it.
It's just fascinating what you do, Steve. Let me ask you about people who are, you mentioned people over 60, and that's pretty much who I'm attracting. I don't know, that maybe they think I look like an old guy and they relate to me. My students, I guess I have some in their 50s, but most of them in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s. So they are not career bound. They don't want to, they're not looking to tour the world playing sold out arenas to their adoring fans. They want to play some classic rock riffs with their buddies, or some blues shuffles, or maybe some bass, a little funk R&B. And also a lot of times when you get into your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, things like arthritis, tendonitis. I'm just trying to paint a picture for you to give you a context.
Yeah.
Because you've got such a unique perspective. I want to take this opportunity to ask you, what advice could you impart to those people? What kind of goals should they have? What should they be thinking about? What kinds of things should they be striving for? What kind of mindset should they, jump in anywhere?
Yeah, no, I think, because again, my students range from, I think my youngest at the moment is 15, and my oldest is, who is my oldest student at the moment? Probably in his late 60s, I think, at the moment is my oldest. But I've had students in their 70s before now. Never in their 80s. That's amazing. Yeah, no. So, and again, I think for me, it's what I try and do is I want them to feel like whatever it is that they care about in music is okay. Like that it's important for them to establish what it is that matters to them. And that if that is, like you say, playing along with classic rock, then there are a set of skills that will help them to do that better. And it may be that as they do that, the horizon of possibility along which they're kind of, aware of, the things that they can choose to do, it might change from being in their bedroom to playing with a friend. It might change to finding a couple of people online that they can record these tunes with. There are different ways of conceiving of what they want to do next, but the next isn't necessary for that learning of songs to be important. And it may well be that in the process of learning those songs, that sparks a curiosity about how songs are written, and that I tend to talk a lot about the how as well as the what. So if I've got somebody who wants to play Black Sabbath tunes, for example, We'll talk a lot about the fact that Geezer was a phenomenal improviser. That an awful lot of what went on in Black Sabbath was not written. You know, that first album was recorded in a day. You know, that they were a very quick live in the studio band, and they would get an idea and they would make it, and so there would be these tightly written riff sections, and everything else was open ended. You know, you take a tune like War Pigs and what goes on in that, or Sweetleaf, or you know, there's all these tunes that have these big open, almost like Miles Davis kind of improv sections. And when you get into that, when somebody sees that their hero was the person who did that, they go, oh, that's not just for jazz weirdos. I can actually learn how to use a minor pentatonic and play around with that. And I can stick a drum beat on from Apple Loops or YouTube or whatever, and I can create my own stuff. Because I think there is within each of us an innate joy at creation, in the creative process. So it's not, so learning other people's songs is enough if that's what you want to do. But more often than not in every case, but in almost every case, that leads to at least a curiosity about what it's like to create and to make things up on your own. So I would then use those songs as a framework and go, well, let's take, you know, if somebody's listening to Zeppelin or whatever, then you go, great, well, a lot of their stuff is basically blues form. So let's start with the blues. So I would start to look at structures and forms that have room for the creative act, room for improvisation or for rewriting riffs or for kind of coming up with things, and go, great, we can do this. And we can just, I mean, YouTube is such a great resource for this. You just put funk drums 100 BPM, rock drums 80 BPM, you know, and you get a track to play to. What an amazing thing, what an amazing gift that is to have that, to actually have that.
I've already got that on my site when they subscribe. It's part of
which is great, you know, and there are, you know, and I think that is also a lovely service when you kind of, you know, when you provide people with backing tracks. The Scott's Bass Lessons app has loads of great drum grooves in it. There are different places. Apple, obviously, if you've got any Apple product, recorded, you know, GarageBand or Logic, it comes with a ton of loops. And digging into those, and like for me, the serendipity of not spending too long trying to find it, but just kind of grab something and play to it and go, okay, I need to make sense of this. But I think the specific kind of nature of my response to this is the kind of person that finds me as a teacher, because I've documented fairly well how and why I teach the way I do. So I tend to find people who want to experiment. That most people who want to play just classic rock, as much as I'm happy to teach that and I love doing that with people, they're less likely to find me in order to do that. So I do have and have had a number of students who do that, but the vast majority of my students are people who are like, okay, there's a little bit of what you do that I don't necessarily want to play solo, but I am interested in how chords are formed on a bass, or I want to learn a bit about harmony, or I want to learn to play melody, because obviously the most visible part of what I do is my own music. But I have, to completely contradict myself, I have got students that have found me through a teacher listing site who months into it have gone, wait, do you make music of your own? And I'm like, yeah, did you not Google me when we started? You literally found me on really? And then they're, you know, thankfully their mind is blown when they go and find it. But like that's happened a couple of times in the last 10 years that somebody has kind of come along and had no idea about my history at all. But I do also teach in a university, and that's obviously a different kind of structure as well. I teach degree students, I teach master's students, and yeah, so a lot depends on with them. It's much more structured because they actually have exams to do. But I tend to avoid that kind of structure with my private students because
something else interesting, and you touched on this near the beginning of our conversation. It surprised me at first, but then I realized it wasn't such an odd thing. There are a lot of people who are totally content to just sit in a room and study bass and practice, and play along with records, and they're not really clamoring to get out there and play with other people or play in public. And you had a comment on that. Can you talk to me just a little bit about your take on that?
Yeah, I think in a culture that is constantly trying to turn everything into a side hustle, doing a thing because you enjoy it becomes quite a radical act. Just going, I want to play bass for myself. Like that's a genuinely radical decision now, because everything is pushing us towards going, no, you should monetize this. You should see if you can get sponsorship deals. You should see if you can get free cables or strings or whatever. It's like, turn this into your new Instagram thing. And it's like, no, don't. I mean, it's okay if you do, if that is your job. But the idea that everybody needs to do everything and make it visible and make it a performance, when actually the music's greatest gift to each of us is therapeutic. That if you aren't receiving from music more than you're giving, you will run out. It's a bucket that needs refilling. And so I find that when I sit down to play, the value of it is my gratitude for the opportunity to play. And that again is where the subscriber audience comes in, because they mean that I get to do that without obligation. I get to do that without thinking, oh fuck, I've got to, oh sorry, oh dear, you can edit that.
Oh golly.
Golly gee. I've got to make this for YouTube, or I've got to edit this, or I've got to chop this so that it'll work as a reel. I don't have to do any of that. I can throw things up on Instagram and YouTube and let anybody find them if they can, but I'm not thinking about it strategically, because I'm a 52-year-old dude. I don't want to I'm not trying to play influencers at their own game. They're far too desperate for it, and I cannot find myself competing with people like that. And there are people who do that really, really well. You know, that I'm a huge fan of what Scott does and what Ian Allison does, and the solo stuff that Sharon Reynolds has been putting out recently. I really like what Mark does with Talking Bass. There's a bunch of people who do online content for bass players.
I hope
really, really well.
On your list for bass players.
Yeah, no. Let me get to that. You know, but again, my understanding of you is, you know, you sit in that kind of part of my brain alongside Ed Friedland and even Dale Titus when he was a columnist at the magazine and his DVD, as somebody who predates the internet for me, somebody who wrote books, who has that kind of scholarly thing that is not about just doing clever video. Like, you do video really well. You've obviously spent a bunch of time, you know, thinking about the brand identity that you want to put across. It's great. It's really good. But over and above that, you've also got this kind of heritage as an educator, as somebody who had a publisher when that was the sort of thing that again, for people of our age, you know, that meant something. That was like a record deal, to have a book publishing deal. You know, Hal Leonard, your stuff wasn't it? Was yours Hal? Yeah, yes. Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, that was a flipping big deal. If somebody had said to me, "You can have a deal with Hal Leonard," I'd be like, "Really? Wow!" Like, and, you know, but for me, what I had was my world was magazines. So I had a column in Bassist, and then Bass Guitar Magazine, and then Bass Player. I did the beginner column for them for 10 years, and I did it because Joel McIver, the editor of Bass Player, said to me,
I love Joel.
So Joel said to me, he said, "Do you want to do it?" I said, "I will only do it if I can do it my way." And he went, "What's your way?" I said, "I want to write a beginner column for grown-ups." And he went, "What do you mean?" I said, "All beginner material is super infantilizing. It's really adolescent. And we forget the fact that if somebody is 40 and is learning bass for the first time, they've been listening to music for 40 years. Their ears are incredibly sophisticated. They just don't have the language to describe what it is they're hearing. But if I played them a Beatles original and a Beatles cover, they could tell me which was which. No matter how good the band was, they would recognize the recording." And you go, great, well, that's a level of sophistication in a person's listening skill that needs acknowledging and needs bringing into their learning. Because when we just go, right, we're going to play, you know, Snug as a Bug in a Rug, or some kind of, you know, tune a day for the bass book one rubbish from the 50s, it's like, that doesn't help. We need to acknowledge that people are sophisticated listeners and have a desire to play the music that they love. And it's, you know, and that sometimes that's gonzo rock, you know, and they want to play like Gene Simmons, and that's cool. But other times that's playing like Mick Karn or Nick Beggs or Mahini Day, or, you know, whoever it is. And, you know, there's a sophistication to the way that people listen to music who are grown-ups that needed acknowledging, because it was never there. And so that's how I wrote my beginner column. And at some point I'll turn that into a book. You know, I've got literally 10 years of them. I've got 150 of them or something, you know. Ooh. So I should do that. But yeah, you know, so you sit in that space for me. So you have that kind of, that sort of slightly more elevated thing, where rather than me seeing you as a you know, the kind of person who has viral videos, it's like, no, John wrote books, like, you know, books with elongated cartoons of bass players on the cover. You know, there was it the Fretless one that had that? Which was the one that had the
don't have a fretless book
There
yet.
was it fretless?
I
Was it
think
not fretless
you're
one? Was
talking
it?
about my first two books, Funk Bass and Funk Fusion Bass.
It was the funk one. It was the funk one, which had that. There's like a stylized,
Yeah.
a kind of illustration of a
My
bass player
first
that's all
book
stretched out. Yeah, that's
came
the one.
out
Yeah,
November 1992.
that's flipping it. Really, it's that old. So you're almost. I mean, so you're almost back. So yeah, I mean, so that means that I would have seen it when I was at college. That's how that's how far back we go then. So I would have seen your book when I was at college, and I would have been looking at it alongside Slap It by Tony Oppenheim, which was
Yeah.
the first bass book I ever got.
The orange cover book. Yep.
For so many of us, that was the first bass book.
It
You know,
came
like
with an
that.
Evertone sound sheet, those
That's the
rubber
one, the
records.
flexi disc. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of, but yeah, no. So I think that there's an awful lot, and I see some people who claim, teachers who will only teach advanced players. I'm like, why? What's? I don't understand that. That's the thing. I don't understand. Like, I love having a student who doesn't have a bunch of nonsense they need to unlearn. That because most advanced players that I have, there are stumbling blocks. The reason they want lessons in the first place is they really recognise that something is missing in their own player. I've taught pros, I've taught people with millions of record sales under their belt, and they come to me because something's missing, and that normally that's quite a forensic process. I love teaching beginners because I get to introduce them to the ergonomics of the instrument and the joy of playing it and all that kind of stuff in a way that where they haven't absorbed a bunch of nonsense from either a bad teacher or just from years and years and years of doing it themselves and not thinking about it.
What's the biggest thing that they're missing that you need to go and correct them on?
I need to correct them on. Normally, bad technique is normally because people have a sense of what they should do rather than sitting down with the bass and going, what's comfortable? So the first thing I do is I go, look, I just want you to just sit and be comfortable. Stick your bass on your lap and put your hands on it. And they'll be like this. And you're like, well, why are you doing that? That's clearly uncomfortable. And they're like, well, it's kind of, that's what they imagine a bass player looks like. And you go, no, just rest your hand on the table or on your leg, bring your fingers up like that, and bring that up to the neck. And they'll go, oh, wow. And I go, yeah, so 4 fingers naturally cover 3 frets. So you kind of, we don't have to do that. If we're playing Dream Theater, yeah, sure, we'll have to do that, but we're not doing that yet. So keep your hand relaxed. And the same with this hand. Like, how does it sit? Well, if I do that, my thumb is really naturally going to sit on either the E string or the end of the neck or the pickup, somewhere like that. And my fingers are kind of resting comfortably on the string. So let's start from a place of total relaxation rather than one of forced technique where everything is tense and your muscles are anaerobically respiring and producing lactic acid and you're getting all that burning sensation. It's like, nobody needs that. So yeah, so I think for me, like it's often to stop striving. I think again, it's so good talking to you about this because you will come up in the same generation as me, in that we inherited this kind of very Victorian kind of model for music lessons, where everything was super structured. The Carol Kay's books were there and Monk Montgomery's book, and there were a couple of other things around. But for the most part, music lessons were the person with either a physical or a metaphorical stick that was going to hit you on the knuckles if you got your fingering wrong. Yeah. And it was patterns, and it was, and we'd inherited this thing from classical piano. It was like Hanon. Definitely, if you've ever come across Hanon, it's the book of piano exercises. Exactly. So it was the bass version of that was kind of what was in our heads, and we were like, it has to be taught to us, otherwise we're not learning. And having got to a point where we're going, no, learning is about, like it's particularly if you're wanting to play your own music. So this is always a split. There's a point where if you want to play your own music, then your superpower is going to be your taste. And your taste is powered by your curiosity. So everything we do is going to be built around you asking, not have I got this right, but is this good? Because have I got this right is a question where you can be right and still sound terrible. There are I've heard very correct performances that bored me senseless. And I've heard people make clanging mistakes that were fascinating and vibrant and alive and dangerous. There's that great story about Dark Magus, the Miles Davis record, which was recorded at Carnegie Hall. And the reason the drums sound as mad as they do is because Al Foster's hi-hat clutch was broken. So it's like shh, all the way through. It's like this incredibly aggressive drumming, but it's because its kit was broken. If he was worried about being correct, he'd have gone, I can't play. This is terrible. I can't do this. I need to get... As it was, he was like, no, I'm just going to be good. I'm just going to make a good noise with what I've got. And he made an extraordinary genre transforming noise. And so that invitation to think about what you like and to stop saying to me, have I got it correct? and go, no, we can do that. We can have that conversation, but nothing stops there. Everything is now, okay, well, let's do something good with it. Let's put that in context and make music with it. And that could be that we use it to apply to someone else's song. We could play the bass part to a Journey song or a Coldplay song or a whatever, Taylor Swift song. Doesn't matter what it is. We can put it in context, or you can make something else of your own out of it. But that creative act, that point of going, this is what I like. This is where my taste gets engaged with what I'm doing. Rather than it being about what I've told them to do, rather than it being an established curriculum that dictates what it is that you should learn. Because there's a billion things we can learn. So the idea that I would go, okay, this is the list of things that are important, that's nuts. It's like, no, that list is 1,000 miles long and 100 miles high. So
Great
we can
point,
go in
Paul.
wherever your taste takes us.
Great
We can
point.
create structure from within that.
I need to ask, I can't believe how long I've kept you. I looked at the clock and whoa, I
Yeah,
can't believe it.
I've just messaged my student that I was meant to have. I've got a student
Oh,
coming up. So I've
I'm
messaged him to
sorry,
say I'm going
but
to be late.
yes, I think I'm going to get a lot of hate mail. I can't believe you didn't ask him what he uses, what his gear is. So I
Yeah,
know you
so
have a lot of
let's do
stuff, but
do a
can you?
quick tour.
Yeah,
So
can
so
you?
so
Well, the
so
tour
we'll do
might get
bases
me up.
first. So
Tour
this is
get,
the main axe at the moment is my Elric. This is the SLC Steve Lawson Custom Mark II.
ooh,
So this is this I think was the first headless 6 that Rob had ever made. He'd made a 4-string headless before this, but yeah. So this is an absolute work of art. It's an extraordinary instrument. That's my main bass now. It's 32-inch, 16.5 mm spacing, passive, but coil tappable. So that's dual coil, single coil. That switch is a pickup selector switch, and that's a kill switch. So I can do stuttery Tom Morello type things with that. So that was, but before that, so that's the Mark II. Before that I had a Mark I, which is an inch longer, as a headstock. So that was the Elric Mark II. So this happened in the relationship with Rob started in 2015 when Modulus folded. Rob and I had been talking for years about what I would want, and it was like, and the timing was perfect. So this is passive single coil. It's got flat lands on it at the moment, and it's beautiful. These are all semi-hollow, but like without the F hole. But yeah, Rob Elric is a bass making like savant, a genius. It's extraordinary what he can do. And so these, but I've got these. They're like I've never got on with the boutique sound, because there's often that sort of mid scoop to it, which means that it doesn't really work for normal bass. And I wanted basses that I could play in a band or, on a covers gig if I needed to. So that was the fret version. This is the fretless twin. I don't have a fretless twin for the headless yet. I want that. That's what I want next. Rob, if you're watching this, get on with it. So this is the fretless version with the pink ivory fingerboard, which is a African hardwood. But yeah, again, single coils, pickup selector switch, kill switch. So those are my 3 main basses. But I've also my most recent instrument is a Nordstrand Cat,
yep,
a Synonix.
recognize that a mile away.
Which is exactly. Which is beautiful, and I'm a huge fan of Carey and all that he does. He's
I interviewed Carrie a few months ago or last year. I don't remember when it was. No, it must have been this year. It was, yeah.
He's a remarkable human being who makes
Mad
great instruments.
scientist.
But is Carey and I were friends long before we ever had any kind of professional dealings. Like I wasn't using any of his equipment. We would meet up at NAMM, and we would always have time to just find out how each other were doing. He's just a genuinely great human being. But the fact that he makes, instruments this good, I've used his preamp as well over here. So I'll do a quick look at that. Let's see if we can angle the camera down over here. So what we have here is the effects unit is called the Mod Duo X, and that's a multi-effects unit that has a digital pedal board in it where I can route things in 1,000 different ways. And then on top of going into that, I have a Nordstrand Starlifter preamp, which is I use instead of having an onboard preamp in the bass, I use an external one because it's just a better quality preamp. Although I do want the Trickfish one in a couple of these basses. I then have a Chaos pad, and this is a MIDI controller that, which allows me to play drums with that. Yeah, and then so that there's 6 outputs that come out of that, so I can do synth pads and all kinds of freaky business with that. So that has kind of over the years has shrunk down from being like a 4U rack with a 14-channel desk in the top. And you will remember this probably back from NAMM in the early days. I would have this enormous setup, and it's now down to one that I can stick in the pannier of a bike and ride to a gig. That was the plan. So the Mod Duo X is transformed everything. That changed it. So Mod Audio are a company from Berlin, and in fact they're the company that made the software for that new dark glass pedal, the whatever it's called. Why have I forgotten its name?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Whatever,
Yeah.
the grey one, the beautiful, it's the extraordinary one. That runs on the same engine as this, but it's a stripped down version. This does more and has 6 outputs. So this is a kind of like hyped up version of that dark glass anagram. That's the one. It's a like a souped up version of what the anagram will do. And I couldn't make music without it now. It's just, it's got, my looper is inside it. I managed to get Bob, who made the Looperlative, which is the hardware looper that I helped to design, to do a software version that is working inside that. And yeah, so that's the equipment. And then strings are all Dunlop. So the first ever 6-string flat wound set that they made was for me. And you can now order those. And I use Super Brights. I use nickel Super Brights on, I don't know, I've got stainless steel Super Brights on the headless and on my modulus 4-string. And I've got the flats on. I've got flats on almost everything else actually at the moment. Yeah,
What
I've got
about
a lot of Dunlop flats.
what about pickups?
Aero. So on all the Elrics, they've all got aero pickups in them, and they were made especially for that bass. So that's not a pickup that exists as a kind of, it's a custom order if you want to get the SLC pickup. It was made specifically to pick up the resonance of a chambered bass, and they're extraordinary. They're quite noisy because they're single coil. The ones on the Mark One, the ones on the Mark Two are a bit safer, but they're also very slightly microphonic, which I don't really mind because it picks up resonance and finger noise, and it feels a little bit more acoustic. So it's the sort of thing that should be a bug, but is actually a feature. Yeah. So yeah. Aero pickups, Dunlop strings, Elric basses. That's the main setup there.
Talking to you, Steve, is just a reminder of what a bass geek I am, because it's fascinating. I could go on talking to you all day. So let's not wait another 11 years before we do this again.
Absolutely not. I would happily talk to you every month. I'm sure we could fill an hour as often as we have time to do it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, John. Really, really good to speak to you again, my friend.
Thank you so much. And you do look good. You look robust. You look
Thank you.
marvelous.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Appreciate that a lot.
Please continue with your strength and your virility.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you so much, my friend. And maybe I'll see you at NAMM. You tend to be a regular.
We'll see. I'm not the biggest fan of spending 2 weeks in a nice detention centre. So we'll see if I can actually, if by that point it seems like I might actually be able to get through immigration. Yeah, who knows? It's a genuine concern for coming into the States right now. So
Yeah.
we'll see if that actually happens. But if I can, I'm a NAMM veteran of the last 22 of the last 25. I think I've been to.
My first NAMM show was like 1991 or something like
Yeah,
that.
you got a decade on me. Mine was 99. So yeah,
Yeah.
amazing,
But
amazing.
I mentioned before we started recording, I'm going to be in England. So
Well, if we can, I mean, looking at your schedule, I'm not sure I'm going to be around in those places, but stranger things have happened, and it would be a delight to see you.
well, you come and hang in my online community. I'll come and hang in your online community.
I would love that. I would love that.
Thank you so much,
Great,
Steve.
John. All
Take
right.
care. Much luck, continued success, and continued good
Thank you.
health to you always. Thank you, my friend. What a fascinating man. I thought I knew Steve. I've known him for, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 years, something like that. But I learned more about him during this interview than I've learned in all of that time together. He is awesome. If you ever get a chance to see him live, or if you just want to get a hold of any of his recordings, he's really one of a kind, truly fascinating man. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community, men and women in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s. And you know what they're doing? They're learning bass. They're having the time of their life playing music that they love. You need to come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. You're never too old to groove. I will see you right back here next week, same time, same place, with another bass player interview right here at ForBassPlayersOnly.com. In the meantime, I'm John Liebman. Let's play bass.